I think there was like 2 weeks before the HSE, and I tried to treat my study kind of like I was going to school. So, I'd start at 8 a.m., I'd finish at like 3 or 4 p.m., and then just try and give myself the evening off. I'd say after we graduated, which I think was the end of September, I gave myself maybe 3 or 4 days to just do absolutely nothing. And that was like, I've just graduated. This is a big thing. I'm going to stay in bed all day.
If you frame it like, hey, that's like a school day and doing a bit of homework after, it's not that bad. Hey everyone, it's Johnny from Jettle, and welcome to another episode where I chat to some of the state's top achievers. In this case, we are joined by Piper. Piper did incredibly well in her HSC. She actually got a state rank in 2 subjects. She got 17th in English with a mark of 98%, so basically full marks, and then 8th in ancient history as well, ATAR 99.3, so incredible results all round, and an all-rounder, speaking of which. So Piper, thanks so much for joining us to share some of your insights. Congratulations on the result. How are you feeling? You just got the results. What does that feel like?
I am so over the moon. It's just such an incredible feeling. I think the week coming up to like when the results came out, I had been stressed so much that I'd kind of convinced myself I was going to get a 0. So the feeling of opening that ATAR that morning and then all of the good news that came after that, I'm over the moon about it.
I imagine. And when you reflect back on the year, does it feel like something that was the product of a lot of hard work? Do you think there was some luck involved? Like what kind of variables went into it now that you look back in hindsight?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a lot of hard work, but I think if you ask any year 12 student, a lot of them will say the same thing. It's a crazy year. I was also pretty lucky that I was really passionate about all the subjects that I chose, and a lot of the things I was really interested happened to align with the HSC syllabus. That's definitely kind of luck of the draw if you actually enjoy what you're studying. So yeah, I think it was a nice combination of those 2 things that ended up with how it went.
Yeah, excellent. And in terms of going forward now, what's on the horizon for you?
I'm going to Melbourne University, and I'm going to do an arts degree, funnily enough, in English and ancient history. It's funny how that turns out. And then I'm thinking about getting a law degree after that.
Oh, fantastic. Well, all the best with that. That sounds exciting. And as you say, I can see that you were excelling at the things you were genuinely interested in. So that does make sense. But in terms of the actual work that went into it, I mean, looking back at the year, if we just think about English, for instance, how much work did go into it, especially for students who are watching this now, maybe they are about to go through year 12, or maybe they're already in their last year of school. Run us through the kind of general approach that you had and the mindset as well towards study and doing your exams.
Honestly, it was kind of less sitting at a desk revising than you would think. The biggest thing for me, honestly, was being really, really present in class and really listening to that, because it is so much easier to revise than to learn it at the desk. Which was something that I figured out pretty early on. Being really engaged in those class discussions, it means that you can ask the questions that you want to while you're there, and also ask new things that you wouldn't have thought about before. Honestly, that's where half of your theses come from, is one random 10-minute conversation on a Tuesday afternoon. But as for actual revising, I did a lot of essay plans and things like that. I tried to do as many questions as I could, not even writing out the whole essay, but just, getting my quotes together. How would I answer this question? How is it relevant to the text? And yeah, that was most of it. And I just tried to do that pretty consistently all throughout the year.
Wow, I mean, it sounds easy now that you say it like that. Just pay attention in class, folks. Let's dive a bit deeper into that. So when you were preparing for exams, what were the kind of key ingredients that went into your preparation?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I did for each of the units was had a very bare bones essay scaffold of these are the quotes that I want to use. These are the general parts of the text that I want to touch on, but it's really bare bones. There's no thesis. It's just kind of 3 paragraphs that are generally about something that will come up. And then it was about finding as many past questions as I could, whether that was other schools' trials or past HSC or random ones on the internet, planning those and making sure that I was really answering the question with those. And then, if I was getting bored, I might write one out the whole way. Yeah, that was pretty much about it for English.
So when you say bare bone structure, 3 paragraphs, are you talking about the 3 body paragraphs? You didn't prepare any kind of introduction or conclusion directly, but you did have the meat of the argument there. You had kind of the main points you wanted to talk about. and the main types of evidence?
Yeah. And then when I was doing the plans, I would usually write out the introduction just as the whole thing, because I think the introduction is really where you want to answer the question the most. So really, you can't go in with an introduction really, because you never know what the question's going to be, and so often the introduction is where you get to prove that you haven't just written something at home and memorized it and hoped for the best. So I would write out all the introductions and make sure they were really tailored to the words of the question and kind of what it was asking you to do, and then just go in with the plans of the paragraphs and see how I could use my evidence to support that thesis.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the ideal way of doing things if you can do it that way. I mean, a lot of students are probably wondering, well, how do I write a high quality introduction if I haven't prepared something? So what are your kind of tips there?
Honestly, I think that the biggest thing with the introduction is you have to make sure you've read the text. I know so many people that, you do the spark notes and you do the lit charts, and that will get you so far. But in those tricky situations where you're really trying to show to the marker that you're answering the question the way that they've asked it, you need to have read the book, because it means that if it's something that you've never seen before and it's unlike anything you've ever tried, at least you can have that moment and sit there and think, hey, I've actually read this book. Let's forget about the lit charts and the spark notes and everything else. This is the text as I remember it. This is the question in front of me. How do those two things kind of relate? And once you've got, your understanding of the text and your interpretation of the text and the question in front of you, everything else will kind of fall into place if you practice it a lot and a lot. And it really is about practice.
Yeah, great. And how much practice did you do? Like when we're talking about preparing for the HSC or the trials, how many different questions would you look at for each module?
I tried to do like 2 or 3 a week, but that ended up being pretty unrealistic because they kind of took longer than I was expecting them to. So it ended up being I'd do like 1 a week, and then coming up to trials week, I'd do like 100. But no, it wasn't like 100. It was more like 20. But it was as many questions I could find. You run out eventually. But, you'll feel it once you've kind of figured out the formula of how to do it, and then you don't have to do as many. It got to the point that I would skip through 5 questions and then just find one that was so wacky and weird, and I'd be like, there's no way they would ask this, and then do that one.
And when you're saying you do them, are you always doing a full essay response to these questions?
No, so just a plan is all I do. So the introduction, and then plan the 3 paragraphs, just like, dot points, just my quotes, things like that. And then if I found one that was really tricky and I'm looking back at it and like, oh, I don't really know how well this would go, then maybe I would write it out.
I see. So you are, over the course of this period of practice, doing a lot of full introductions, but then just scaffold in the main body paragraph. So you're not having to spend the full amount of time writing the essay.
Yeah, but then also it depends what your individual strengths and weaknesses were. My biggest thing was answering the question in an authentic way. But if your thing is about analysis of the text, obviously you'll need a different technique. I was pretty happy with my analysis. It was mostly about making sure that my essays were really targeted to what they were asking.
And what was the secret to your analysis? Like, did you have any kind of tricks that you used when you had to construct an analysis of a particular piece of evidence?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing for me was making sure it flowed. Like, I think that's the easiest thing to get wrong with analysis, is that it comes out clunky and your quotes aren't quite integrated right. So the biggest thing I found early on was making sure I'm always reading my essays aloud. And if it doesn't sound natural and nice when it's spoken, it'll be clunky to read. But then, yeah, I guess other than that, it's the things that come out in those class conversations is where the really good analysis lies, of, the things that people latch onto in conversations, or your teacher points out and goes, oh, this is a good point here. That's the biggest thing for me, I think.
And so you were always super conscious of what was being said when discussing the text, and then were you just typing out notes? Like, what was the way you kind of collated all of that information before incorporating it into your essay?
I mean, I've never really been one to take notes in class because I just find that I can't really do both things at once. But it would be like I'd have the text in front of me, and if there was something that I really liked, I'd just highlight that. And then when I got home, look through what I'd highlighted. And I found that, like, if I'm picking out the quotes that I want to use while I'm in class, it saved a lot of time later when it's like the night before and I haven't got my essay structure yet. So yeah, and then I just go through that and then pick out the things that I really liked.
And how did you think about structuring the actual essay? So you've got your 3 paragraphs. How are you ordering your ideas there?
I mean, it was different for each module, but I guess for 1984, which was my common module, for example, the thing that I found the best to do was I structured mine by like human experiences, because that was the module, right? Texts and human experiences. So I knew that, like, no matter what the question was, my thesis needed to come back to some broader conclusion about human experiences. And I guess I just tried to do something similar with the other units as well. I tried to really understand what the module was about, because you'll get a general gist of what your essay needs to do. Like, you know, with textual conversations, I knew that there needed to be something about what we learned from textual conversations. So my structure was always something around that. With T.S. Eliot, I needed to use, you know, that one was easier because you pick a poem, but each paragraph is the way that I did it.
One poem per paragraph. Is that what
Yeah.
And what was your module A one? Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, I did Richard, that conversation.
And you did four bodies there, or three?
Yeah. Four bodies. So they were like conversation 1, conversation 2 was the way that I did it.
Any other tips in terms of structuring a response for students who are kind of like lost on how to get that flow of ideas? I mean, reading things out loud is great for sentence flow and progression, but what about more generally in terms of just kind of piecing things together?
The thing about an essay is that it's always answering one broader question. So it's really important that the 3 paragraphs that you choose to focus on kind of link together in some way or another, so that you have this cohesive thesis throughout the whole thing. You know, if you've got like point 1, point 2, point 3, and they're all relevant and they're all about the text, but they don't quite, you know, mirror each other in some way or another, it can be kind of clunky for the marker to read. But if you've got 3 paragraphs that are distinctly different, but also answer a wider question that you're focused on, you know, it's more cohesive, and that's part of what the markers are looking for.
Yeah, that's great advice. And in terms of module C, the craft of writing, what was your approach to that one?
Oh my gosh, that was a wild card. That was definitely where I was most uncomfortable. So I did a lot of work on that. Honestly, that one for me was most about like writing as many pieces as I could, and not even full pieces, but just like fragments of things that I could come back and use. Our school was pretty strict with telling us not to memorize a piece beforehand, because, you know, it's so obvious when you come into a room and you write something down that's completely disrelated from the brief. So I just tried to write as many like fragments of pieces as I possibly could, like 200-word drabbles, 300-word drabbles, and see if there was something that I used there that I could expand on that matched, you know, the prompt.
So you weren't a big fan of, or rather a big practicer of memorizing components for that, or you implicitly did because you practiced so many different types? What was the kind of approach there?
I mean, there was a few full pieces that I had that like I was familiar with. I didn't memorize them word from word, but I remembered the general gist, the general structure, a few of the quotes I used, especially for discursive. I found that really important, especially when you need like experts and, you know, things like that. You've got to have some kind of arsenal of things that you can use. But yeah, I didn't want to go in and just write down something word for word that I'd written before. That wasn't the approach that I took. It was just kind of, I had a few general ideas and pieces of evidence about the craft of writing or about the importance of literature and things like that, that I could integrate into something new.
Yeah, great. No, I think that's good advice. I mean, it's a very organic approach. I think it's a more natural one, and I think that speaks to your passion for the subject, to be honest. Some students who find it harder to engage with the subject might want to take a more formulaic approach, if you will. But I think if you enjoy the subject and can engage, what you're describing is a really great way to go about it. The other section, of course, is the short answers. What did you do to prepare for that one?
Just as many past papers as I could, honestly. I think that there's no shortcut to that. You just have to practice it. And it was, honestly, that was the bit that took me the longest to get around, because I will get really flowery with it and kind of take it off in a million different directions. But if there's something that's a 3-mark question, you really only need to say the answer. So I practiced a lot in being succinct and getting to the core of what the text was asking. And really that was just practice. I did as many as I could, and then, you know, I got there.
How much practice would you say you did, for instance, in the lead up to the final HSC exams? Like how many practice papers would you have done for the short answers?
I would have done maybe 15.
That's good. It's good to have a number.
Yeah. And then maybe there was a couple of questions that I did 1, 2, 3 times, but I tried to do most of them, you know, under timed conditions.
Great. And just to go through a couple of those out of interest. So if you're doing a 3-marker, how many sentences or pieces of evidence, if it was, you know, for instance, like a how question, did you find was sufficient for 3 marks?
Like 4 sentences I found was enough. I think, especially for those shorter mark values, 2 marks, 3 marks, those kind of things, I had to kind of be more formulaic with it because I just wanted to keep writing. So I tried to do like 1 more sentence than what the mark value was. And that helped me a lot. And, you know, it's not a strict rule. You can write as much as you think you need to write, but that kind of restriction helped me a lot.
Yeah, and what about for like a 6 or 7 marker? If it was, did you do a kind of mini essay style where you had a little intro? So what did that look like if you break it down into pieces?
Especially for those like compare questions, things like that, I tried to have just a 1 sentence introduction and then maybe 5 or 6 sentences on each text, but also, depended how much time I had.
No, that's good. That sounds like a good approach. Practice papers unavoidable if you want to get good at short answers. In terms of your study routine in general, so if we're looking at, you've talked about some of the things that you did. How much time were you spending preparing for things, throughout the week? Like what was your day to day? What did a normal week look like in terms of getting home from school or even before school? Take us from there, all the way to going to bed.
Oh yeah. I didn't do anything before school. I know people that were getting up at like 5 a.m. That's not me. I'd go to school. I try to use my free periods just working on like homework and things like that. I tried to get all of that stuff out of the way before I got home, just so that I wouldn't have to do it. I also had a lot of extracurriculars during year 12. So I definitely had to kind of schedule around those, but it just meant whenever I got home, I tried to do about an hour of whatever I felt needed doing. It wasn't always English. Most of the time it was maths, to be honest, and just get that hour done and then have the rest of the night to myself. Obviously it was different when I had assessments coming up, but just on a general week, that's what I would try to do. And then for the weekends, I'd give myself Saturday to do maybe as much as I felt I needed to do and take Sunday completely off, like not look at anything.
Oh, great. So Sunday you did have as a kind of day of rest, and that was the one where you kind of recharged the batteries. That in addition to some of like extracurricular activities and things like that. Talk to us about how you balance social life and, school life, I suppose.
Yeah, my social life was really important to me in year 12. I always found that like if I was stressed and unhappy and like not doing well, like I wouldn't learn well, nothing would go in. So I spent a lot of time and energy and conscious effort in kind of making sure that I was still living my life during year 12. So that meant like, even people turning 18, birthdays, things like that, I'd go out, or like 2 or 3 hours to do absolutely nothing and scroll on my phone. I would do that. Also being able to compromise and be like, I need to get this thing done. Maybe I shouldn't go out this weekend and I'll get it done, and having that conscious tapped into getting everything done, but also making sure that you're well and you're happy and you're not like letting your youth fly by. That was really important to me.
Absolutely. I think that's awesome that you were able to balance that and still do so well. And in fact, it's probably because you balanced it that you did so well, because a lot of people do burn out. So really important to have that time off and to treat yourself to the joys of being an 18-year-old as well, or 17, however old you might be. So in terms of the amount of study you were doing, if we look at the period before the HSC, when did you go into full throttle, and what did that look like? How many hours a day were you studying before your final exams?
I'd say after we graduated, which I think was the end of September, I gave myself maybe 3 or 4 days to just do absolutely nothing. And that was like, I've just graduated. This is a big thing. I'm going to stay in bed all day. And then after that, I think there was like 2 weeks before the HSC, and I tried to treat my study kind of like I was going to school. So, I'd start at 8 a.m, I'd finish at like 3 or 4 p.m, and then just try and give myself the evening off. And I found that worked really well, just to have that structure. I was using these hours just like I was at school. But obviously if I had things that still needed doing, I would do that. But yeah, having that structure was really important. And I tried not to stay up the night before my exams. I tried to be in bed by like 9, which I found really good.
I bet. So how much sleep do you reckon you were getting in that period?
In the period as a whole, I'd say probably like 7 or 8 hours, but the night before an exam, I was getting like 10 hours.
That's awesome. That's really good. Keeps the brain fresh. And you were structuring your study days like a school day, but just clarify, so how many hours do you think in total you were actually doing active work?
Okay, so I think there'd be like 4 in the morning. I'd take a half an hour break for lunch, and then maybe like 3 after that. And I do Monday to Friday, and then I'd maybe do like 3 or 4 hours on the weekend.
Okay, sounds reasonable. So 7 hours of work a day, but this is when you had the full day to study, and that's really all you're thinking about. I think that's pretty feasible. We've heard some different numbers here and there, but I think if you frame it like, hey, that's like a school day and doing a bit of homework after, it's not that bad. And certainly if you break it up into those components, then it becomes much more feasible. So when you were actually locked in and studying for a particular subject in those periods, whether it was before trials or the HSC, what kind of study methods did you use in terms of staying focused and not getting distracted? Like, what did you do with your phone and how many minutes were you going at a time?
I mean, a lot in that period, especially before the HSC, was just doing past papers and like sitting down as if it was the actual exam, which was a pretty good way to keep me focused because like the time is on. If I pretend this is my HSC, I've only got like 40 minutes left or 30 minutes left to get all of this in. And that was a good way to practice like with my handwriting as well and things like that. But other than that, I was pretty tempted by my phone, I'll be honest. So it just kind of had to be a thing of recognizing like, all right, if I keep reaching for my phone, I want to be on it. Let's give myself 10 minutes. I'll set a timer and then I'll put it away again.
I like that. So timer, give yourself permission to go on it, but then that comes with the caveat that, hey, I need to then put it away from me so I'm not tempted to reach at it.
Like if you're on it with the guilt, you'll never get off it and you'll also feel terrible. So, you've got to give yourself permission.
Well said. And in terms of the other subject you got a state rank in, 8th, ancient history, what are your key tips for preparing for that subject?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Ancient is kind of crazy because there's so much stuff that you could know and there's so many different pieces of evidence that you could use. So the biggest thing for me was just like learning the evidence that you really are interested in and you really want to know, because there's a million different opportunities and different ways that you can tackle the exam. But if you sit down and pick, okay, I'm going to talk about this and this and this and this and this, you'll be okay. The other thing is ancient, I think, is the most important subject to listen in class, because the number of times I've been like in a test or an exam and it's a dot point that I kind of skimmed over, but then you just get this flashback memory of like your teacher mentioning it once 5 weeks ago and suddenly it's in the paper. That's like the biggest thing. So especially with, ancient, modern, any of those humanities subjects, it's so important to listen, because the throwaway comment could be the thing that changes you from a B to an A.
Yeah, good point. And in terms of practical advice for sitting the actual exam, structure and extended responses, anything there that stands out as like a really key thing you think maybe helped you excel in that particular unit?
Yeah, I think it's a similar thing of knowing, how much detail a question is asking for. I mean, in the core section, it's kind of easy because they give you the lines and you just fill up the lines. But with the extended responses and those other sections, it's important to consider how much you can answer in the time and how much you want to have. Like for a 12-mark to 15-mark question, that's kind of a mini essay style. Whereas if it's 5 marks, say a couple of things, use a couple pieces of evidence and then go.
And that just comes back again to lots of practice.
Yeah, lots of practice. You can do those plans as well for ancient. That's what I found really good. If you get a past paper and you just write dot points of kind of, this is the evidence that I would use, this is the general gist of what the question's asking me to do, here's how I'm analyzing this source, and you don't have to spend all the time writing out pages and pages.
How many past papers do you reckon you looked at and did plans for ancient?
Looked at, I'd probably say maybe 8 full papers, but I would individual questions I was doing all the time. Like our teacher would send through like a couple of random questions and we'd have a look at that. And then I would say like full HSC papers that I completed, only maybe 2 or 3.
Got it. But effectively you did do a lot more than that, because over time, which I think is a really important point, you didn't leave it to the last minute. Over time, you're constantly practicing a couple of questions here and there, getting familiar with how to answer and apply your knowledge on a particular area. Do you have any other general advice that you would want to give, like to your, whether it's your former year 11 self or it's an upcoming year 12 student or students in general?
Yeah, honestly, what I wish I could have told myself at the start of the year was focus on all of your subjects, not just the ones that you really, really love. I definitely had that problem where I'd sit down to study, be like, oh, I want to do English, oh, I want to do ancient, because those were the things that I was really interested in. And it meant that definitely by trials, I did maths advanced and I'd get to maths and I was so far behind and I had a lot of catching up to do, because I just spent all of my time on the things that were easy and the things that, it didn't take up as much stress and struggle. But if I had just been consistently doing my maths like I was doing anything else, I wouldn't have had to really knuckle down as much as I did leading up to trials and then leading up to the HSC.
That's good advice. I mean, do you think, what kind of strategy would you use if you were to go back in time to actually enforce that?
More of a timetable, definitely. I kind of was going with the flow a lot during the HSC, especially in those early couple of terms. Just, what do I think I want to do? Oh, I'll do this, that'll be fun. Instead of being like, all right, today is maths day, I'm going to do maths for an hour. So I probably would have had more structure that way.
Yeah, because if you just leave things to chance, you're naturally going to gravitate towards the things you're interested in, and the things you're not so interested in will just continually get neglected. So scheduling, timetabling things in, planning, that's definitely been a theme throughout these conversations. So I think that's really great advice. Piper, thanks so much for sharing your insights across those subjects and in general. Unless there's anything else you want to share.
No, thank you for having me.
No, absolutely. Thanks for coming on, and I'm sure everyone else appreciates it. For everyone watching, thank you very much for watching, listening. Please make sure you like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one.